it's a huge step forward for mankind and also health of the Western world that they actually commissioned. They commissioned this report, and actually they came up with 4 main pillars, which were so accurate as to the things which are causing all of these health problems. But there's one huge thing that they've missed. If they want to roll back the chronic disease epidemic, they have to start.
Sam and Kit Bowen-Russell, who really took skincare into their own hands.
Twin brothers from the UK who are taking the skincare industry by storm.
Sam is a nuclear astrophysicist, and Kit is a geophysicist and author.
A Notre Dame grad and his twin brother are looking to revolutionize skin health.
The two launched a 2-year intensive research study.
2 very smart guys who knew all about bad skin at a very early age.
That woman at the end was our mum, and really she's the face which launched 1,000 questions for us.
Right, we're live. So, Kit, we've got a very special news flash episode this week, haven't we? So, basically, this one's all about the new MAHA report, or more the MAHA Make Our Children Healthy Again assessment, and then the strategy that preceded that assessment. So, in February 2025, Trump did or made or ordered an executive order about the MAHA report. So it formed this, and they said what we need to do is have an assessment to find out where the chronic disease epidemic is happening, especially in our children. So Make Our Children Healthy Again assessment. And then since that time, they've been doing that assessment, and this report or strategy that's come out is how they're going to be going forward, and how the government's going to be advising and allocating funding and all those kinds of things. So what we're going to do is we're going to go through, I've picked out the main parts that are really good for me, and we'll react to that. And then also at the end, we're going to reveal a massive, big sort of missing piece of the puzzle, keystone in this, if they want to achieve their dream of rolling back the chronic disease epidemic. So, yes, have you read every single word in this assessment, Kit?
I haven't actually read the full report, but I remember reading the sections. So a few of the sections which really stood out to me, which I'll come on to later. They're really interesting.
Yeah, so we'll come on to them.
To put it back on you, I assume you have.
Yeah, you know me. I've made a spreadsheet about everything, but no, I haven't read. Well, I've read most of it. But
Sam, you said that there was an executive order back in February to write a report on the exact causes for the chronic disease epidemic.
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know that. So this report, which came out a few weeks ago now, wasn't it? That was because Trump did that executive order. Is that right? Oh,
exactly that. Yeah. So it commissioned that.
So there we go. You're obviously at a more high level than me, because I didn't even know that.
Yeah, but I'm bringing you in to discuss the concepts, because anyone can know details about when an executive order was passed and what some specific wording was in a document, but not everyone can explain to the masses about how all of this links in. So that brings us on to the main goal. Let's just set out the main goal is for the MAHA, the movement is to roll back and get rid of the chronic disease epidemic, which is massively burgeoning. Burgeoning is a positive word. When it's not positive, it's negative. But it's been massively spreading across the Western world, even when amazing advances in the medical area have cut out all these acute diseases. So, but the chronic disease. Say again?
Don't worry. Sorry, I keep cutting in. But you said acute diseases, which is right, but then also infectious diseases.
Acute and infectious, you're right, yeah. So, but the chronic disease is what this... Yeah, exactly. Sorry. So the chronic disease epidemic is what the MAHA is based on. So that's their goal. And then the aim of this report especially is for children. So there's a massive increase in chronic disease in our children. So it was interesting that I think RFK said something when he was talking about Trump, that Trump said, I don't care if it's unpopular, we just need to save our children. So this is the real thinking. And then RFK is big on that too, because he works with a lot of people about their children. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to go through they have 4 main points, and you tell me what you think. So the 4 pillars they've put each of these parts under is poor diet, chemical exposure, lack of physical activity, chronic stress, and then over medicalization. So you've got those 4 parts, and they sort of go into more detail about the specifics. But those 4 parts are what this report really focuses on. All right. So what's your reaction to that?
I think those 4 pillars are really good. I'd be interested to see, and I read a few of these, the detail which comes under each one of those. But what was the final one? You said diet, chemical exposure, lack of physical activity, and what was the 4th one?
Well, over medicalization.
Over medicalization, okay, because that could. Lots of those things are really broad, aren't they? So chemical exposure, we can come onto this later, but you can get exposed to loads of chemicals unassumingly in our environment through loads of different ways, can't you? And I know the biggest one they talk about is through our food and our diet, but I think they've missed out one of the biggest factors of chemical exposure, which we'll come onto later. And the same thing for over-medicalization. That could mean multiple things.
So the general overview for us, and we'll come on to it, is really that this is a massive step in the right direction. Obviously, a big supporter of the MAHA cause and rolling back the chronic disease epidemic, seeing as we've spent most of our adult lives doing and researching exactly that. So it's a massive step in the right direction. And looking at and talking about things that no one really talks about before in government. So it's a massive step in the right direction. Big part they've missed out. But let's go into I picked out 5 specific areas that are really interesting, that no one really talked about before, and that I think this is an amazing step in the right direction and amazing work from the whole team. So the first one, like you said, is chemical in general, just chemical exposure. So they're really big on chemical exposure and the chemicals in foods. Why is this such a good step in the right direction?
Yeah, firstly, I just want to say, I think my response was a bit muted before, but no, I think it's a huge step forward for mankind and also health of the Western world that they actually commissioned. They commissioned this report, and actually they came up with 4 main pillars, which were so accurate as to the things which are causing all of these health problems. So yeah, that's a good step, a massive step. So why is chemical exposure such a big factor? Well, because there's loads of these man-made synthetic chemicals before all the people are like, well, anything's a chemical, even natural things, which is true. But we're talking about, when we say chemicals, we mean man-made or synthetic chemicals. So the types of which have only been introduced to the human body in the last 100 or more years, since the Industrial Revolution, really. So we've evolved and we've existed throughout our hundreds or thousands of years of existence as Homo sapiens. I won't get too geeky, but we've evolved to be coexistent with lots of the things in nature. So all the substances we find in nature, often we've evolved to become coexistent and for them to be harmless on our skin. But these things which have been introduced recently, our bodies are not accustomed to dealing with. So they often upset the body's natural functions and they cause a lot of problems. That's why I think that's such a big one.
Right. So and obviously we'll come on to it, but they put in their poor diet as the number one thing they'll be focusing on. That's what, and MAHA does do that. It focuses a massive chunk of its energy on food and the chemical additives in food. So there's a lot of chemical additives in food, right?
Yeah, so they're right to focus on the chemical additives in food. I think that's been one of their most central pillars for a long time now, hasn't it? The focus on the chemicals and getting the artificial ingredients or additives out of food altogether. And I know that they've made huge strides in actually doing that and actually getting a lot of the big companies to say we're going to remove some of these toxic, dangerous chemicals which we put inside foods, sometimes seemingly for no reason other than to do things like increase the shelf life or just even have like a really fluorescent radioactive color, which I love in America. I love looking at Fruit Loops and they look fluorescent and they look like something which would glow in the dark. I love that coming from the UK. But when I eat them, I feel so odd because, well, I mean, you say that, but I love looking at it in America because of all the colors they're allowed to use. Whereas because we actually have more regulations in the EU and in the UK, I never see these bright, vibrant colors in foods in the UK, which is a good thing because they're horrible for your system. So I know that recently companies have committed, due to the MAHA pressure in government, they've committed to taking these horrible toxic chemicals like dyes out of their foods, haven't they? So that's a huge thing. What was your question again, sorry?
Well, that was it. Just how we'll come on to we won't go into why it's and what it's doing and disrupting because we'll come on to that. But yeah, on the Fruit Loops, I think I agree with the fun colours, but some of it's just slightly too radioactive. It looks too. If you look at nature, you see amazing colours in nature. You don't need these sort of man-made, over-the-top radioactive colours. When I go into a flower garden, you see amazing colours. Some of these things are just weird, over the top. So that's my only. But I agree, it is fun, but terrible.
You are right, Sam. What I would say is, I think sometimes it matches the enthusiasm and the vibrancy of American people. Sometimes, so when I come over to America and it's like this exciting, bold new frontier where everyone's enthusiastic about life, and you see these massive colours in cereals, which a bit like Americans sometimes do turn out a bit fake. But
yeah, so
what we're saying is, I just quite liked it when I initially came over here, but I understand
that's
they're
great.
really.
That's really good. Let's get back to the main point because I agree with you. That's really good because we've got a short time. We're going to keep this nice and short, Kit. So yeah, I agree. The next point, number 2 point, is they talk, and it's in tandem with this. They talk about cumulative exposure. So chemical exposure, obviously, if you're eating, depends how much of it you eat, but you eat, say, 3 meals a day, you get some chemicals in there, and there's a fair amount of chemicals, and it depends how much you eat. But cumulative exposure, why is this so important? Not just for in general, but also for the chronic disease epidemic.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Cumulative just means built up consistently day after day. So while our bodies might be quite resilient and they might be able to fight off, or they are able to fight off attack from things which could be harmful to over the short term, if it's consistently barraged with these things which are known to cause so many problems, well, cancer, hormone disruption, and destroying the microbiome are just 3 which are well known of some of these chemicals. If it's consistently being barraged with these chemicals, then it could break down its natural defenses. And all of the research is pointing towards the fact that it does.
Yeah, so, and I'm gonna ask you one more thing about cumulative, because this is what everyone misses, and we'll come on to it in which areas. But because people always talk about, there's this thing, you know the expression, but they say safe in dose. I can't remember what it is, but it's talking about the amount of, if you've got this ingredient that is, say, at this level it's toxic, they say below this level it's fine using it. But the point about cumulative exposure is that if you keep using that product, even though that one product has the safe below, can't remember the exact term, but it's safe below this level, then if you keep using that, the point about cumulative exposure is we don't know the effects that just constant cumulative exposure does to our body. And we're seeing this massive increase in chronic disease.
That's a really good point, actually. And that got my mind whirring there, because you're so right about that. When they say safe in amounts, what they mean is safe in the short term. So they haven't studied the long-term effects of constant, consistent, but small exposure to these chemicals. So obviously, it's very easy to tell. If you're exposed to a huge amount of chemicals in a short space of time, you probably get an allergic reaction or something immediate happens to your body. And that's where they call it damaging. But the long-term effects of consistently barraging our bodies, whether it be in foods or we'll come on to this later, in cosmetics with these horrible toxic chemicals, is yet to be ascertained. So that's why they're brilliant to focus on cumulative exposure. I think what a lot of people miss out, and also willingly so sometimes in the case of big companies, is that they only test the effects in the short term. And then those results from studies, this is a common problem I've seen, they just show the short-term effects and they never look at the long-term consistent effects of these chemicals on the human body.
Well, I will say that if you've got a whole cacophony of chemicals and all different things, it's near impossible to link, when you've got cumulative exposure of those chemicals, to link one of those chemicals to the change there. That's why you can do studies on when you put large amounts of chemicals and see how it changes the system drastically. But when you have the sort of lower cumulative exposure, then it's much harder to prove or link anything, especially as everything's interlinked. So that brings us on, because we've got to move on to the third part of that stood out to me, which is they're majoring on gut microbiome research. Just talk a bit about this, how it's linked, because this is your area, starting to be your area now, how it's linked to chronic disease.
Well, damage to the gut microbiome has been linked to, as far as I can tell, the vast majority, if not all, chronic diseases under the sun. And again, sweeping statement, but people always say that skin problems start in the gut. And if you have a damaged gut, it's been linked to things like cardiovascular problems, heart problems, even brain problems, which seem totally disconnected to the gut, don't they? So the gut obviously is a major factor in this. And we know from our research that people in the Western world, their insides are damaged by a huge amount compared to our ancestors. So our ancestors, their gut microbiome is the healthiest ever recorded, obviously.
Okay,
but
so I want to really simply there, because I know you could talk for ages about this. I want to, so everyone can hear, is with the gut microbiome, why are they majoring? We'll come on to what they've missed out, but why are they majoring on the gut microbiome? Is it linked to chronic disease?
Oh, sorry, yes. No, the gut microbiome, there's a huge amount of research on it. And it's been linked to the vast majority of chronic diseases out there.
Right. And like you were saying, those rural people, we'll come on to this, because this is amazing, because it's all of your research, but we'll talk about the last point in a minute. So the fourth point is oral health and systemic disease connection. Why is this such a breakthrough for everyone to be talking about?
Do you mean why is the oral health one specifically?
Well, no, just this kind of thinking. So they've started with the gut microbiome, right? But this kind of thinking for systemic, oral health, they're linking it, but systemic disease connection, just really quickly.
Yeah, because it takes us away from thinking about each part of the body as isolated and individual, and takes us into this new paradigm where the body is one big interconnected system, which again is been talked about for thousands of years, but weirdly, in medical practice recently, we seem to treat each part as if it were separate. But the gut and the mouth being shown to be involved in all of these chronic diseases in your whole body is just buying into this thinking that the body is one big system, which it is.
So you're saying that the gut and the mouth and other things are linked. Is that in your research?
Yeah. So what our research is pioneering is showing that, one, the body is one big interlinked system. You and I are physicists, aren't we, Sam? So we always talk about nonlinear physics and chaos theory, which we won't talk about here, but it just shows that in a system, every single individual part is linked. So if you change one part of the system, it affects the whole system. So the same is true in the body. And what we're showing for the first time is that the same is true of the skin. So if you have small changes in skin health, then this is going to sometimes probably disproportionately affect other areas of the body as well.
Yeah. So, I mean, I could challenge you on which one is the most important. But let's go on to the next point. So the last point that I thought was amazing, because again, it aligns with all of the thinking and the research that you've done. So it's rural and tribal health. So people might look at that and go, that's really weird. Why on earth are they looking at, well, rural but tribal health? What's that got to do with anything? So what has it got to do with chronic disease epidemic?
That is a good question. Well, basically, our ancestors had the healthiest microbiomes and bodily systems ever recorded. People will say, how did you record our ancestors? But the reason they talk about rural and tribal health is because people in isolated communities or tribes people, they have a very, very similar lifestyle to our ancestors, which was cut off from the Western world, Western modern developed world completely. And they don't have things like modern medicine. So
okay, and what do they not see? Like, this is what I'm trying to get the point of. What do these tribes people and rural people, what do they not see?
They don't have any of these, as we call them, Western modern chronic diseases.
Okay, so that's why they're studying them, right? Because in all of your and our research, we compare it to tribes people, don't we?
Yeah, and that's a good question. I'm getting you now. Basically, the reason they study them is because they take two groups of people. One is the rural tribes people, or the isolated tribes people, and they look at them and they have so few of these chronic diseases that we have in the Western world. So here's the Western population. These guys are riddled with these chronic diseases. So there must be some difference, because we're the same humans. There must be some difference in the environment between the two. And again, it's quite obvious to us. Some difference or many differences in the environments, which causes the chronic diseases in this population, in the Western developed world.
Okay, so environmental. So this shows, like in your research, while you were invited to Washington, it was being picked up mainstream now by the Washington Post, is how, well, one, all of these link together and cause chronic disease, all the microbiomes, but also how skin is the first line of defense. And actually a damaged skin microbiome can cause all of these chronic diseases. So let's go in summing up, really an amazing step forward in terms of their thinking, rather than just treating each part separately and just using new drugs rather than lifestyle. But what's the big thing that they've missed? There's a massive thing. In our eyes, isn't there? It's massive.
Yeah, so they talk about chemical cumulative exposure, and they talk about systemic disease and how the gut and the mouth microbiome are intrinsically linked to these. But they miss one huge part of both chemical exposure and also one huge part of the body's interlinked system. And as most Americans in DC tell me, they say, yeah, it's the body's biggest organ. So they've all been primed about this, but then they don't quite put two and two together. So what is this part? I hear you screaming at me, Sam. Well, that's the skin. So that's our area of research, the skin microbiome. And that's really why we're here in Washington, DC, because we're here to show that despite MAHA doing brilliant work on this big report, there's one glaring thing they've missed out. And that's the skin.
So, and are you saying, so tell everyone about your newest research in one sentence, that was published in the Washington Post. What's it saying about the skin?
Well, if you have damaged skin, this can lead to whole body problems like asthma, food allergies, cardiovascular diseases, and even brain problems. So this thinking, again, isn't new in the gut, because everyone accepts now, the majority of people accept that the gut is linked to all of these chronic diseases. But for some reason, when it comes to the skin, people think it's just an isolated sheet and it's not actually a part of the whole body system. But obviously, with our research, we're showing that it's a living, thriving ecosystem, which is just as important as the gut for whole body health, if not more so, because of...
Say that again?
Don't worry. I was trying to cue you up there, but...
So then, and well, the biggest, in one sentence, the biggest chemical exposure, not just chemical exposure, but cumulative exposure, because cumulative every day. So where's that coming from that they've missed too? These massive amounts of chemicals, way more than in food.
Yeah, well, it's coming from the exposure of the skin to synthetic chemicals in everyday cosmetics. The skin is, we always say, it's the first line of defense. So it's the first thing which comes into contact with chemicals in our environment. And this goes even beyond everyday cosmetics, but the sheer amount of chemicals we put in our on our skin from cosmetics is huge. I think they did a study and they said something like the average American woman uses 12 cosmetics a day. So you're smearing that all over your skin, normally 3 times a day in many women I know's cases. So this seems a much larger amount of chemicals than is going through the gut in foods. And I also think as the skin is so delicate and it's the body's largest organ, when you're putting these damaging, hazardous and toxic chemicals from everyday cosmetics on it, you don't know what effect it's having on the whole body. So our research is showing that actually by damaging the skin so badly, you could be causing all of these chronic diseases, such as, well, I said it before, but food allergies, asthma, cardiovascular diseases, and even brain diseases. All of those were thought before to be totally unlinked to the skin.
Yeah, and so I think I'll sum up there because we've gone over our time, but in terms of this, so we've sung the praises of the Make Our Children Healthy Again, the assessment and the report. It's got the government now talking about, rather than medicalisation and acute disease, the real problem now is chronic disease. And so it's got everyone talking about how to change lifestyle, the microbiome, chemical and cumulative exposure in our environment, like you were saying, that's destroying our health. But, so we're going to be a big proviso here, for MAHA to succeed in its goal of rolling back the chronic disease epidemic, it has not only got to take into account the skin microbiome, but it's also got to see that and see the research that's showing that the skin microbiome is a major factor in the chronic disease epidemic, and it on the skin is a major area for where chemical and cumulative exposure, if not the highest area.
Yeah, exactly. I agree. Just to go back to the tribal thing quickly, the reason I love that is because I always talk about caveman skin in our papers and when we talk to people. It's because that we found, well, not us, but we collated all the research which found that isolated tribes people, the Yanomami people actually in Brazil or the Amazon rainforest, can't remember if it's Brazil, but they had the healthiest skin microbiomes ever recorded, and they had no skin problems. So these things like acne and eczema, which we think are just common human diseases, are actually Western and modern diseases. They had none of them. And also they, compared to them, our skin microbiome is damaged by up to 84% in some cases.
Brilliant. Well, on another episode, as we have talked about, we'll see where you got the 84%, because it seems like a number you've plucked out of thin air, but it isn't. And it's all from the world's first measuring technique for the skin microbiome, but we won't go there now because I'll be off into physics. But yeah, I think so to sum up, if MAHA wants to succeed, it's got to take into account the skin and the massive amounts of chemicals going onto the skin that are destroying our health. So, okay, we're going to leave it there. Anything last to say?
No, I think you summed it up perfectly, that MAHA is doing brilliant work, but there's one huge thing that they've missed, which if they want to roll back the chronic disease epidemic, they have to start, even though a lot of them say, oh yeah, well, the body's one big system and it's all interlinked. But when it comes to the skin, many people turn off. And I think that's the blind spot in today's health movements.
Exactly. I like that, the blind spot. Right. Next time, I'm going to talk more about the science.